to welcome everybody and say thank you for joining us this evening in the third of our events in the series of our social action and social justice town halls. This event, My Black Skin is Not a Crime, will address the relationship between the criminal justice system and the Black community. And I want to thank all of our panelists and our moderator in advance for participating. And I'm going to turn it over to our social justice chair, Thomas Dawson.
Hey, what's going on, Turk family? I'm really glad that you guys are able to join us today. We have an interesting conversation about the relationship between the criminal justice system and the Black community. We have different members of the criminal justice community here today with us to be part of this conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and kick off with some introductions so we can dive straight in. Our moderator for today is Altmann Pannell. He's the University of Maryland class of 2009. Altmann serves as Director of Government and External Relations at the International Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators. Altmann began his career in public service and government relations while at the University of Maryland College Park, serving as president of the Black Student Union and president of the Chi Delta chapter of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. He was inspired to become a public servant and leader in his community. Since that time, Altmann has served in multiple capacities under 3 elected officials in the state of Maryland and has been the nonprofit professional association government relations arena for over 5 years. So he'll be our moderator.
Thanks, Thomas.
Our first panelist is State's Attorney Braveboy. Really excited to have her. She is a state's attorney for the Prince George's County. As state's attorney, Aisha Braveboy is one of the top law enforcement officers in the county. She's responsible for the safety and security of over 900,000 citizens. Her motto for this office and her administration is that crime is personal. It's personal to the victim, personal to the community, and personal to the state's attorney office. So please, let's welcome State's Attorney Braveboy. We also have Jessica Jackson, who's the University of Maryland class of 2005. She is currently the United States Probation Officer for the Middle District of Florida. She's a court-appointed United States Probation Officer for the federal judicial system. She currently runs an extensive re-entry program in Tampa, Florida, alongside with her colleagues. As a federal probation officer, Jessica supervises federal offenders and assists them with their reintegration into the community. So let's welcome Jessica. And last but not least is Brittni Downs, who's the University of Maryland class of 2011. She is Assistant Public Defender for the state of Maryland. Brittni graduated from UMD with a BA in Criminology and Criminal Justice in 2011. She earned her JD from the Columbus School of Law at the Catholic University of America in 2014. And Brittni works for the Maryland Office of the Public Defender, where she represents individuals charged with various felonies and occasional misdemeanors throughout the judicial system. So let's welcome Brittni as well. So Altmann, as the moderator, I will turn it over to you. And we look forward to hearing this conversation.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Thomas, and thank you everyone for joining today. Happy homecoming week, first of all. Although it's virtual, we're still here in some capacity. So thanks everyone for joining and taking time to discuss this really important topic. My Black Skin is Not a Crime. It's a really interesting title, and I'm glad we made that title because it's very relevant in the public safety and police space, but it also permeates in pretty much every arena within this country. Systemic racism affects you, whether it's the boardroom, the courtroom, or the courthouse. So, it's one of those things where we need to cover this topic, and hopefully that these conversations can continue moving forward. A couple of quick housekeeping notes just to remind everyone on the call. Number one, it is being recorded, so you'll be able to refer back to that. Number two, we are all here in our personal capacities as TERP alum. We do serve in a number of different capacities within the criminal justice space, but we'll be speaking tonight just based upon our personal experiences and not representing any of our current institutions. Lastly, this call, since it is in our personal capacity, is not open to any press. So just want to remind everybody for that, just in case anyone from press comes on the call, just want to remind that this call is not open to that. With that, again, thank you everyone for joining. And I want to just jump right into it. We've got some great speakers tonight. And before we get into specific questions, I want to just kind of reflect on a few things that that I've found in my capacity right now serving as overnight CLE, I deal primarily with the federal side of criminal justice, looking at everything from DOJ to what's going on at your state level and things like that. It's interesting, I was actually having a conversation today with a chief at a very prominent university. He was the chief of police for a very local city of ours, and I won't name the city, but we were talking about police reform and what's going on, what things can change. And I want the panel to kind of reflect on this and give a response after what I said. And what he said today was, he said, you know, our real problem is we don't train our officers to deal with law-abiding citizens. We just train them to deal with criminals. And I had privates in my capacity as a chief at the city come up to me and ask me, well, chief, what do I say to citizens on the street? And he said, I just tell them, say good morning. But when they come out of the training academy, they're not trained to be the guardian, if you will, on the street, and more so the law enforcement officer. So I wanted you all to kind of reflect on that, and how do you feel when you hear something like that coming from a chief of police today? Anyone can start.
Well, thank you so much. That was a great way to actually start this conversation, Altmann. When I hear you say that, it just resonates so much with me. I wrote an article, and I'll try to share that with you. And it was published in the Afro, and it was really about how policing really needs to be looked at a lot differently, and from the police officer's perspective. You know, there was a gentleman by the name of Sir Robert Peel. He's kind of known as the father of modern day policing. And part of what his philosophy was that the police operate with the permission, essentially, of the community. And that the focus really should be on preventing crime as opposed to making arrests. And so there were a number of strategies that he thought was important to achieve that. But when I look at who he was and where he was policing, what I know that is that obviously he's British, and the majority of people who he was policing looked like him, right? And the way that we here in America, because of how policing even evolved in our country, it has always had this history of suppressing and controlling Black people, our movement, our freedoms. And so the way in which police engage, and I'm not saying all, but how we see engagements on our street play out when they make those stops, it's not, hello, how are you today? Do you know why you were stopped? You know, and that positive interaction that could actually de-escalate a situation before it gets to a point where there's a confrontation. I think that we do have to retrain and really create a culture of policing civilly, where people are not automatically considered criminals just because they were stopped. Maybe they were stopped, rightfully stopped, because maybe they, were speeding, or maybe they made an illegal lane change, or what have you. Maybe the stop was a legitimate stop. But when you approach that person, you're not approaching the enemy. You're not approaching someone who you assume is a violent felon, or someone who, you have nothing in common with. This is a human being who you're stopping, and you should treat them with respect. And so what resonates with me is that we do need to change the entire culture of policing and how we even train police to engage with residents, because I think a more thoughtful civil engagement, even with people who have committed even serious offenses, I think would lead to better outcomes on our streets.
Thank you for that. And before Brittni and Jessica, you give your responses, I just want to ask our listeners, a lot of terms might come out tonight that I really encourage you to write down if you haven't heard about them before, and go look them up, because they are relevant when it comes to elections, with judicial proceedings and things like that. A few things that State Attorney Braveboy did mention is de-escalation, as well as culture of policing. And those terms are actually getting put into legislation right now on the federal level to be changed or impacted. And a lot of times you're asking, well, what can my politician do for me, or X, Y, and Z? These terms, you can go and Google and find them. and figure out what exactly these politicians are saying on these bills. And we'll dive deeper into them, but a lot of things will come out tonight that are really important when it comes to police reform that you might not know about or might get brushed over, but we're gonna go ahead and dive into them. So thank you for that. Brittni or Jessica, any response to the quote?
Yeah, so I do have a response to that. When Ms. Braveboy was speaking, there was a lot of talk about training, right? We need to train our police officers, we need to do more training. And from my perspective, we've been training police officers for a long time. There's been talk of implicit bias training and de-escalation training. All of these things are things that have been happening and are things that have not produced results. So when people talk about subjects such as defunding the police, which has been a very, very, very hot topic as of late, we're talking about when you want to train someone, that takes funds. That takes a lot of money. That takes hours and hours of training, resources, and things like that. When people talk about defunding the police, they're talking about taking funds from things that have proven to not be working. So all of these implicit bias trainings that we have, all of these de-escalation trainings, to this point, Black people are still getting, unarmed Black people are still getting gunned down by the police for no reason, despite all of these trainings. Trainings is not the answer. When we talk about defunding the police, we talk about taking money from these trainings that aren't necessarily working anymore and funneling those funds into the community so that, police officers don't come guns blazing to every single stop when it's not needed. So in direct response to the quote regarding police officers not saying hi to people and not necessarily interacting with the community in just a friendly capacity, I think they're not meant to do that. That's my perspective. The police are a militarized group that are meant to be on the offense. So I think that in response to that quote and in response to how we can change things, I think we have to sort of reimagine our idea as a society of how we attack what we consider to be crimes, how we address what we consider to be crimes, and also how we can sort of reallocate some things. Because if we continue to funnel more money into training, it's sort of, it's repetitive because there's already training that's going on. So that's my response.
Sure, and I do have a follow-up question for that, but I do want to get Jessica in the conversation also, just with her opinion on the quote.
In response to the quote, I absolutely believe that there's truth in that. I do think that there has been respectability lost in the training and in policing and in some ways in the criminal justice system. But to just simply pour more money into training, I absolutely agree with Brittni. There needs to be some type of revamping because that's not working. But I think on the most basic level, we need to look at the individual. We need to look at the hiring processes. As a former police officer, you didn't have to tell me to say good morning or to ask how someone's day was because that was in me as an individual. That was my respectability walking in the door. So I think training, of course, is an issue, but I think there are so many other layers that we need to address. It's very complicated, but at the same time, there are other layers. Who are we hiring? People's backgrounds. Are they from the communities that they're policing? A lot of them are not. That's an issue. So I think there is absolutely some truth to the chief's statement.
Yeah, and I think you all touched on some great points here that I've been dealing with in my capacity as well. And I wonder, do we go back to talk about trainings, and most police academies, have an amount of time where they, whether they come out from high school or wherever they come from, you know, they do their, I think it's like 8 weeks. Is that right, State Attorney Braveboy, or is it 16?
I believe it's 16 weeks now.
16
Yeah.
weeks. And the question then becomes, you know, do we feel that 16 weeks is appropriate, you know, for someone that's straight out of high school that might have, you know, come from a county that they're not familiar with the place that they're going to get stationed to? Is that something appropriate? And I know it's something, at least in Prince George's County, that we do a pretty good job on in terms of putting our officers, you know, in the communities they're used to. But you find oftentimes that you'll have these officers, you know, in spaces and places where they're unfamiliar, and the first thing they're seeing is the enemy. I mean, I remember a quote I heard was that, you know, the first day of police training, the first thing they'll tell you is, you know, any given day you could die. You know, so if you're, you know, getting trained and hearing that the first thing you see, first thing you hear when you're in training after high school is you could die, you're coming out guns blazing, and something should shift, whether that's the amount of time, you know, or do we think it's, whether it's community-oriented policing needs to change. And I don't know if that needs to be a law that, you know, the citizens, you know, demand, but what do we think about certain things like that?
Yeah, I actually don't think, you know, we have that the, you know, academy experience is enough time. And quite frankly, what happens in the academy is that you learn a lot of concepts, but when you practice, when you have to put them into practice, you're out on the street confronted with a situation. That's often where even no matter how much of textbook knowledge you have, you may not know how to actually engage as a human being out on the street. So I think we have to do, you know, more, you know, kind of citizen and resident interactions with our officers before, you know, they are kind of, you know, cut loose to sort of patrol our communities, because you're right, many of them don't come from the area. One of the things that I'm a huge proponent of is really getting, you know, rid of some of these barriers to local people being able to even be on the department. Like, I know that one of the questions that are asked is like, have you, you know, used, you know, marijuana or other drugs, but primarily marijuana. And there are so many young people who have used marijuana, but now they're not using anymore, but they have to answer the question, you know, truthfully. But that also serves as a way to exclude them from, you know, being able to, you know, be employed by the department. On the other hand, do we ask questions like, do you harbor racist feelings? Have you ever been a part of a hate group? Have you, you know, like those other questions, you know, that either they're not asked, they're not perceived as barriers. And I think that's where we're losing a lot of potential candidates that could, you know, who live in the community, who know the community, and who can better engage with young people in our communities. So I really believe that we need to get rid of these barriers to hiring local people, people of color, specifically Black people, and quite frankly, Black men. Because when we look at our justice system, I mean, I live in Prince George's County, I'm the state's attorney there, and the majority of the people are Black. I mean, that's just the reality of it. So both our victims of crime and our defendants, the majority are Blacks. So when you look at the victims, they want justice. And we have to do what we can to provide justice for our victims. But then again, we also live in a society and in a community that we understand there has been over policing, over prosecution, over sentencing. And so I don't want to be a part of that process either. I don't want to over criminalize people, but I also am responsible for keeping our community safe. And I think one of the ways we can do that is to work with our police department. I don't control the police department, obviously, but we do work together. And so one of the things that we can work better on doing is recruiting and hiring officers that better reflect the values of the community. So you're not saying, well, this person is being trained to police in our communities, but he or she has never walked our streets. Right. That's a problem right there when we are relying on out-of-state recruitment to provide service to our own community. I think that's a huge issue, but that is the reality of it. And so there is further, I guess, engagement in the culture of our community that these officers need to have. But oftentimes they don't live in the community, because when they do get hired, by the department. Obviously, they're not required to live in the community, and they often choose not to live in the community. So they still don't live amongst the people who they serve. They're not familiar with the culture, and they have a preconceived notion about who and what we are. And I consider myself a we because I grew up here in this county and I understand that culture. So I think what we have to do is we have to hire more locally. We have to get rid of these barriers, and we have to give our officers more practical training on the streets as opposed to just in the classroom, because you're not going to learn how to engage with people by sitting in a classroom. And I think also they need to begin to infuse in their training just citizen interaction, not just with community leaders, but I'm talking about with the kids who they will run into on the street, so they'll know exactly who they are. So the first time that they see someone who looks a certain way isn't out on the street. They've already met someone who looks like that. So they're not intimidated by that person, because that person's a real person. So there's a lot that we have to do. And I just wanted to say to both Brittni and Jessica, I understand the movement towards defunding the police. I get it. And I am all for directing funds into treatment, into other effective tools that will address our community without further criminalizing our community. I agree with that. But I also understand that the way that our officers have been trained has not produced in every way the best type of officers. So even we're going to have training. All I'm saying is that the training has to be better, more robust, and more focused on ensuring that these cultural the ways that our officers are disconnected culturally from the people who they serve are addressed as a part of that training process. But I am all for mobile crisis units. I'm all for investing in social services and family services and treatment. And we have grown a lot of diversion programs and reentry programs because we believe in that. But I can't be the only player in the system that believes in that. We need our police department and others to come along as well.
Sure. And any quick responses before we move on?
Yeah, I do have a quick response to that. I think that the academy and the training that police officers go through today is incredibly inadequate. Police officers have one of the most highest and serious duties in this country. They are holding people's lives in their hands. And I had to go to school for 4 years. I had to go to University of Maryland for 4 years. And then I had to go to law school for 3 years just to be a lawyer. And I don't carry a gun to work. So these people have people's lives in their hands, and they go to the academy and, do some physical tests and go look at a slideshow, and they're able to go out into the community with a gun. It's unacceptable. And that's what I mean when I say reimagining police. We have people with these specialized degrees in social work and mental health and people that are trained in substance abuse. Why is it that the first responders that get to go out into the community and address citizens with a gun on their hip, why do they not have to have similar credentials? That's my issue. I don't think that there's any couple week or couple month training or any process that can get you ready for the extreme duty that you have to go out here and have people's lives in your hands. So that's why I keep preaching. We need to reimagine law enforcement. We need to reimagine policing. And Ms. Braveboy said that she is not in charge of the police, and that is true. But I would just argue that prosecutors' offices do help hold police officers accountable. We do. Because if you bring a charge against somebody and it's bogus, it's that prosecutor's job to throw it out. And in my experience, there's a lot of cases that come across my desk where you have a stop based on nothing. You have a police officer that completely abused his or her power with a citizen. These cases are making it to court because they're not being thrown out by the prosecutors. So while prosecutors' offices do not have control of police officers and police departments, they certainly help in holding police officers accountable, because when the police officers' cases keep getting thrown out and they're wondering why, and police officers report directly to prosecutors' offices. I mean, they're main witnesses in all of their cases almost. So they have a relationship. You see what I mean? So I
do, in the essence of time, I do want to get us to move on because we're already ripping through it. And as we see, I mean, it's not your fault, because this is a really important topic tonight, and we have a lot of people on the call today, and we really want to thank them for joining. And I knew we were going to burn up a lot of time because there's so many elements to police and police reform, and I wasn't even sure how we were going to cover half of it. So as we see, we've just got on this first quote, and we've already burned up the first 30 minutes. So thank you all for being passionate about that. And Jessica, hopefully we can circle back. And I'm going to say another quote, but we don't really have time to respond to it. But I do want to just say it so you can, set up your next talking points. So on Good Morning America, actually, I'm not sure if you all saw it, but there was Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly. He was speaking with Michael Strahan about the Breonna Taylor case. So it's very fresh in our minds. We remember everything that's going on. And, I wish we had time to really dive into that case itself. But one thing he said was, good police don't racial profile, we criminal profile. Now, that can be interpreted in a number of different ways. And I don't know, I don't think we have time to really dive into that, but we can go back to it. But I just wanted to shade light on the culture versus training, because that's really what we're talking about here. The difference between the training of police officers versus the culture that's going on. And there are a few more quotes that I would love to throw in right now. I'm hopefully going to squeeze them back, but in the essence of time, we'll move on. Also this week on Wednesday, some of you may have caught it, DOJ went ahead and passed down the new executive order that President Trump went ahead and made after the killing of George Floyd. And it goes into a lot of different language about, the African American community. I won't read it in the essence of time, but have any of you all seen a change from the actions from George Floyd's killing and calls to police reform, or is that culture and the way things have been still prevalent in your respective spaces? In 2 minutes, please, each of you. Let's start with Jessica. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will say, after the George Floyd tragic incident, our agency created a work group for diversity, and they call it the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. So they're currently drafting like a mission statement and all of those things. So that's in the works for our agency, and pretty much that's the only thing that we've done. I had the opportunity to meet with the Tampa police chief as a result of, the unrest, and they're currently working to create different task forces, and forces, and they're also kind of revamping their civilian review board, and also they're creating a citizens team that will meet with the chief regularly to express their concerns. So down here in Tampa Bay, they are trying to get some things off of the ground, but I'm not sure if it will work. Right. But they have started making some efforts.
Brittni, how about you?
So I'm sad to say, not really.
Sure.
From where I sit, the criminal justice system is still churning in the same way that it has been. There has been some chatter in the county that I work in about civilian review boards for police officers, but I don't know if there's been any movement made on that. I know that as part of the selection process for the civilian review boards, I know that police are involved in that selection process, which seems problematic. But outside of that, I have not.
So my agency, I actually met with every single one of my chiefs during this pandemic, right after the George Floyd incident, to really talk about, you know, what we're doing now and what we can do to make our administration of justice fair where we are. And we actually came up with some really great ideas, some of which we have already implemented and some of which we are developing. So I want to just talk to you about a few things. Now, we have a public integrity unit that absolutely does hold police officers accountable. We've indicted at least 13 police officers since I have been elected a state's attorney. We have won 2 convictions, and we have several other cases that will be going forward this year and next year. So we do a very good job of reviewing cases and bringing and holding those officers accountable. But as part of that process, we noticed that we had to rely a lot on the police department's investigation. And we are tasked with doing our own independent investigation. And so we've been able to engage independent use of force experts to work with us to evaluate cases. And that's a huge change, and it's actually produced very good results for our office. And we're going to continue to use these independent use of force experts in these police involved cases. We've also had a heightened review of stops, and where we think we call it the district court trifecta, where people are charged with resisting an officer. I guess there are three charges that are typically charged together. They're just not coming to my mind right now. but it's all about resisting an officer, an assault on a police officer, and all that. We have now a heightened review of those, and we have dismissed several of those cases where we believe that the officer's actions were, not consistent with training and their policy. And one of the ways we've been able to do that is not to just have the district court attorneys, which most of these cases are charged at the district court level. And these are our younger attorneys, not just those attorneys look at it, but we also have our more senior attorneys looking at these cases so that we can, make appropriate decisions. And again, we have dismissed several of those cases as a result of that level of review. We have also expanded our reentry program called Back on Track, because that used to be really just for very first-time offenders who were drug dealers, and now we're expanding that program to allow more types of offenses to be considered for Back on Track, where an individual goes through a program and then at the end of the day, if they complete it, they have their record expunged. We're also expanding diversion, and one of the areas that I think is extremely important to us, because we've already done human trafficking or commercial sex work diversion, but also homeless diversion, because a lot of folks who come into the criminal justice system come because they are homeless or they have addictions, and so they don't have housing, stable housing. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to properly serve those individuals. And lastly, what I'll say is that we have developed an SAO training academy, because we began to train our own attorneys in-house, and we realized that a lot of this training could actually be helpful to our police officers. So starting in September, we had a 4th Amendment training, which we offered every single Wednesday in September for 4 weeks straight. We offered the same training so that different officers, if they weren't able to take the training one week, they could take it the following week. This month, we're doing use of force and police integrity training. So my public integrity unit is conducting those trainings for officers on what we consider when we're evaluating their use of force in our communities. So we are absolutely taking on our responsibility in the criminal justice system, recognizing that we are a big player, we have a big voice, and we can send that message.
Sure, well, and thank you for that. But I think, and just circling back, a lot of language has come out of the current administration about, police reform and things like that. And oftentimes, if you'll listen to what they'll say, there are differing messages that get sent out, and we won't dive into that just yet. But I do want to stay on the topic of issue officers and problematic officers. One question that was submitted was what type of tracking or registry is in place to identify the officers that may need interventions or rehabilitation and or to be removed from the force. And I don't know if anyone can, well, I know I'm losing you in about 5 minutes, Attorney Braveboy. So you just speak on that real quick, and then I'll open up to the other speakers.
Sure. I think that the police department, at least in Prince George's County, and I'm sure it's like this in other jurisdictions, have some type of internal process, like a triggering process, where if an officer has exhibited certain types of behaviors, that officer will be flagged and, given the appropriate intervention. And admittedly in Prince George's County, according to the department, and I believe our county executive has said, look, this isn't working properly. And so that's why we have a police reform task force that our county executive did establish to look at every aspect of the department, including the flagging system, so that it can flag officers more readily, and they can provide the appropriate supervision or training, or if the issue is that egregious, termination from the department. But that is something that I think is important for our legislature to also get involved in, because it's really important that there is one standard across our state that people can look to and say, whichever jurisdiction I'm in, officers are held to a certain standard. And if they violate those standards, or if they're having problems, that there's some internal mechanism to recognize that. So that is something that I think is important, and that we as a community and as government need to do better. But I think that is something that is being addressed by this task force that our county executive has in place, and we certainly support it. And we will offer whatever training we can to the department as they look to revamp how they get notice of these problem officers.
Well, I'm glad you said in the whole state, because that is an issue actually within our country, and our listeners may not know, but oftentimes when an officer is a problematic officer, they may leave that one jurisdiction and go to another one with all of these different issues on their record and get hired again. And there are certain associations and unions that I will not name that I do work directly with that have certain systems in place where they ensure that their officers will get rehired, problematic or not. And that's something that our listeners can demand change. So when you're asking what can we do, certain things like police unions are a major issue and impact for our communities. And that's something that we might not be able to touch tonight, but that's something I encourage you all to look at and look into. Last question before I lose you, State Attorney Braveboy. What programs are in place to build a better, more trusting relationship between the prosecutors and the communities that they serve?
Sure. Well, we have a monthly community in the courthouse program where we invite the community to come in and talk with us. And we talk about cases. We talk about our policies. We invite our partners in law enforcement, or to come to those meetings to hear from our community. We talk about all the programs that we're rolling out, and there's one in particular that I'm really excited about. And because what we also recognize is that our young people, when I say young, I'm not just talking about juveniles, because we have a juvenile justice system that I think needs some work, but at least the standard there is what is in the best interest of the child. But when you look at adults age 18 through 26, who I call emerging adults, who, yes, they are not eligible for the juvenile system because they are not under 18, but many of them have not yet fully developed or matured to be able to make good decisions in life. And yet they are exposed, because of the nature of some of their offenses, to a lot of years in jail, which I think leads to mass incarceration. We're now developing an emerging adult program where we can evaluate those individuals who are in that age range and determine, what other options we have for them. Some, because of the nature of their crime, maybe because of their criminal history, we're going to prosecute, but there are a significant number that we, even if we do prosecute, we can offer PBJs to after the completion of their whatever requirements that we, want to put in place with them. So we are looking at ways of working with our public defenders and the defense bar to really fashion pleas that meet the needs of those individuals while still protecting the community. Because one of the things that I have to do, and I can't shirk my responsibility to my community to keep them safe. And there are people who are committing very serious, very violent offenses out in the community. And so my goal, though, is to fashion, a disposition for them that will prevent them from coming back into the system. And how we do that is going to require a lot of creativity, a lot of will, a lot of courage, a lot of cooperation. But I'm willing to do that because what I recognize is that those individuals, especially in that age range, we see them over and over and over again. They've come in the first time on just gun possession charges. The next time they're doing a carjacking and an armed robbery, and the following time it may be something a little bit, more serious. And so we can't allow that to happen in our community, but we also can't throw all of them away, because I look at them as my potential sons or cousins or people who I know and care about and love. And so by doing that, by developing and working on developing an emerging adult system of justice in our state is, I think, going to be critical to move that agenda forward. And the last thing I'll just mention is that, my office, I have not only conviction, but sentencing integrity unit, where we look at offenders who may be serving time, but need a second chance. And we have been able, through our work, to release juvenile lifers, which is a huge issue. And I think one day I just would like to come back and talk about the whole issue of juvenile lifers.
Right.
But we've been able to give second chances to juvenile lifers, and we are continuing to evaluate those cases. We have about 87 or so that were Prince Georgians who were juvenile lifers, and we're slowly but surely making our way through those cases. And I tell you, that really changes lives, because these are people who went in at 16, 17, but they are completely different people now, and would never have done what they did if they had the maturity that they have today. And to give those people a second chance just is so important. So I appreciate this opportunity. I certainly am excited to hear from my fellow Terps.
Right.
and I thank you so much for having me. And I hope to be able to connect with the panel afterwards, because I think there's some things that we can maybe work on together.
Absolutely.
So thank you
Thank you again for all that. And I know you have another event. So we just want to thank you again for joining us, and we'll follow up with you afterwards. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you too.
Jessica, I do want to stay on the topic, because what we touched on a bit, and Brittni as well, she did touch on reentry. So Jessica, I'm going to just start with you. What efforts are being made for reentry programs, essentially back into society? What tools are you offering or should be offered for success, whether it's, mental counseling, job readiness, health resources, et cetera? Are there any things in place that you're dealing with specifically, some things that work, and are there any things that haven't been working?
Sure. So in my capacity as a probation officer, that's what I do. That is my job. My job is to assist ex-offenders with their successful reintegration into society. So that's finding a place to live. That's, if they don't have any money, the federal government, our district, we have second chance funds, which, we can pay, for a place for them to stay for a short amount of time. We can give them bus passes. We can, purchase something for them to wear for an interview. We have a budget for substance abuse and mental health treatment. All of those services are there. And so when someone is released, they come to us for their supervision, and we assess them, see what their needs are. And of course, we have a court order that we have to follow as well, which outlines certain special conditions that we have to address. Most of them have to do with mental health and substance abuse. Some of them are restitution based, but mostly substance abuse and mental health, most cases. And so we try to set them up with those services, and we pretty much just go down the line and address those things, and work with them. It's a very, very difficult transition. Some of these guys and girls have been locked up for 20 years. So when they come out and you say, hey, listen, you have to apply for a job online, a lot of times it's a struggle for some of them. So it's my job help them with that. I'm also a reentry officer, and I work with reentry court, and that's an intensive program that we have in my district, the Middle District of Florida, where we have the guys go through MRT training, which is a type of pretty much cognitive behavioral thinking training or program geared towards substance abuse mostly, but we have them go through that. We have them set goals. We have them pretty much go through the program. We address certain technical violations so that they don't have to go in front of their sentencing judge. And if they successfully complete the program and meet all of the requirements, they get a year off of their supervised release. So we definitely work closely with them and trying to get them to reintegrate into society. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for everyone, but that's our job.
Brittni, do you want to touch on that, or can I go to another subject?
You can go to another subject. My job is to keep people out of the criminal justice system.
That's right. Good, because I do want to go back to really the essence of the title is My Black Skin is Not a Crime. And for you specifically, are there any specific laws that Black people should be aware of when confronted by the police? And this just goes back to the quote I said earlier about we don't racially profile, we criminally profile. And then I'm going to give you another knee-jerk quote that I heard one day when I was at a meeting, and I won't say who said it, but they were joking, and of course there's a culture of policing. And the quote said, when in doubt, pull the trigger. And this guy was joking with another police officer. And I caught it, I heard it off cuff and things like that, but that is the culture. So, is Black skin a crime? That's really what you start thinking when you hear certain things like that. So are there any specific laws that Black people should be aware of when confronted by the police? And can you share those with us?
Yes, so I can do a quick little know your rights.
Okay.
If you're stopped if you're stopped by police for questioning, one of the key terms that you need to know is, am I free to leave? That's your key term right there. If you are free to leave, then as a defense attorney, I would advise you to do so. If you are not free to leave, that means you are detained or under arrest. If you are detained or under arrest, you have a right to remain silent and you have a right to counsel. So as a defense attorney, I would advise you to invoke those rights, because there are so many cases that I get. And one thing that people need to understand is that this is something that police are allowed to do. They're allowed to try to build a rapport with people in order to make them comfortable to answer questions that frankly end up incriminating them and end up in court being used against them. So no matter how much a police officer may say, just dude, tell me the truth, it'll help your case. Like, no, it's not working like that. And once a police officer has decided to arrest you, I can never say 100%. I haven't seen every case in the world, but in my experience, once you've been arrested, you're arrested, and there's not too much you're going to say that's going to get you out of that predicament. So my biggest thing is, am I free to leave? If the answer is no, invoke your right to counsel, invoke your right to remain silent. Do not consent to any searches. A police officer does not have free reign to just search your person, your house, your cell phone, your personal effects. There are, of course, instances where they are allowed to, but if you are asked, can I search your car? Can I search your bag? Can I search your phone? If you are asked that question, you do not need to say yes, and I would advise you not to say yes. What else? Also, something that is really relevant now with everything that's been going on, you are allowed to record. You can certainly record police interactions that are taking place. And
do you have to announce that you're recording, at least in Maryland?
I don't believe so. I mean, maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe somebody knows that, but you can record, and that's a huge thing now. I mean, people getting killed by police is not new. It's just being brought to light because of social media. So you don't know how many cases I've gotten where there's a video that really, really helps my client, that really, really helps us to show the full picture. So that's just a quick little know your rights.
Thank you. Is there, and this is for both of you all, do you think there's a difference between racial profiling and criminal profiling? Because that, you know, on paper it could be, but in common practice, have you, you know, is there really a difference between the two? Feel free to
Well,
answer.
I would obviously say no. I mean,
Okay.
there are, I don't know the exact statistics, but Black people are disproportionately stopped by police, disproportionately charged with crimes, disproportionately prosecuted, disproportionately jailed, our sentences are harsher. So race is certainly a driving factor here. And I think that, you know, one thing that's sticking out in my mind is that I think that there's a lack of acknowledgement of that in the criminal justice system. And until
I fully agree.
Until the leading actors of this system, the judges, the prosecutors, the police, acknowledge that race is an underlying issue, is the driving factor of the criminal justice system, until we realize that this system of law enforcement was built with a white supremacist foundation,
Yep.
You know, we're gonna have issues. And just the other day, I had a judge tell a Black man that, you know, well, if you don't do anything wrong, a police officer has no reason to stop you.
Right.
And for me, I mean, I don't know if that's just a disconnect or if that's just deliberate indifference to the fact that you can be driving while Black, jogging while Black, wearing a hoodie while Black, and you're getting stopped or you're getting killed. So for a person that is sitting on the bench, that has all of the power that judges have, for them to tell a Black person that if you're not doing anything wrong, you don't have to worry about the police stopping you, that is a huge problem.
I think racial profiling and criminal profiling on paper is different, but you know, the way officers are trained, and it ends up being the same thing, racial profiling. So I have to agree with Brittni. It may sound good, but no, it amounts to the same.
Sure. Well, let's stay on the fact of judges and things like that, because we do have an election coming up. I'm pretty sure everyone on this call tonight has already voted, but you know, what are the major correlations between elections and the criminal justice system, especially at the local level, but we can talk about federal as well. And something major also just happened on the Supreme Court, and we'll dive into that in a second, but you talk about the elections and the criminal justice system.
Well, I think people are focused on the president,
right?
But you need to focus on the local level, your circuit court judges. They're the people, well, your judges in general, but your circuit court judges, those are the ones, and you see the sign in the yard, elect circuit court judge so-and-so. Well, that's the person that's gonna put you behind bars. So you can't just ignore that fact. You need to conduct your research. You need to invest in that, see how they rule. It takes a bit of work because it's not just readily available, but they're on the ballot. So on the local level, you really have to pay attention to who you're putting in office, because these are the people, the sheriffs, elect the sheriff. Like, these are the people who are putting these policies in place that are affecting your daily life.
Thank you. And Thomas did make a fact that we don't emphasize local politics enough. And those local politicians affect you day to day more so than the presidential elections. Anything else on that, Brittni?
I completely agree with that. I mean, judges, sheriffs, prosecutors, I think, you know, we're in the day and age where social media, we're so into stalking, like who we're dating, but you know, we need to look into who these elected officials are. One thing that I would alert people to is to not fall victim to name recognition, because you see signs, you know, the person who has the most signs, maybe that's the person that ends up winning. You can't go into these elections just going down the checklist or picking the name you like the most.
What should people look for when they're looking, especially at these judicial positions? Because a lot of times we'll say pick 5, right, out of 7, and you just might go with the first 5. So what should they be looking for?
So I think that you need to look for a number of things. You need to do your social media digging, because everybody has a social media presence. You need to look at what was their career prior to them wanting to become a judge, because that speaks volumes about what somebody's, you know, how they sort of see the world and view the world. If somebody was a previous defense attorney, they're gonna be a very different judge than somebody who is a previous prosecutor, I would assume, or I would hope. Political affiliations, who endorses them is also something that's very, very important. If a candidate is endorsed by the sheriff's office and the state's attorney's office, and you are not pleased with your state's attorney's office or your sheriff's office, then what does that say about that candidate?
That's a great point.
So yes, those are some things that people can look for.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to ask an interesting question that did get asked, and we're at the 8 o'clock hour, so we have about 30 minutes. We might run a little bit over, but the question goes: can we really start the process of abolishing police forces in the most problematic states and/or cities? Is this feasible? And if not, what is a better way to address it? And I think if you think of any of your problem cities that might be in the news, but there are also cities that aren't in the news that are just as problematic, and we won't name them. But where do we want to take a police force that's known to be serious offenders for civil crimes and all the good stuff?
So I will start with that. So people get really scared when they hear abolish police. People get really scared. They think, well, it's just going to be a free-for-all for everybody to just run around and commit a whole bunch of crimes. That's not necessarily what we're talking about here. What we're talking about, the first part of abolishing police is defunding the police. And we've talked about that already. Reallocating funds to social workers, mental health providers, substance abuse providers, substance abuse treatment providers, to help with resources such as housing, treatment, and things like that, that you would be surprised would take away so many cases off the dockets.
Right.
So, when you go down the line to abolishing police, we're not just taking away everything. Right? This is not just a free-for-all. But once things are sort of reallocated and moved around, then we can address what are we going to do about public safety? Mm-hmm. What are we going to do about, instead of sending out a bunch of police officers that are, again, straight out of high school with guns, what are we going to do to address the public safety piece? Because a lot of the crimes that I see happen because that person is in need of something.
Correct.
No person just wakes up and says, I just feel like going to steal food from a gas station today. Most of the time, if somebody is stealing food from a gas station, they're hungry. And that's just an example. So, a case comes to mind where a gentleman seemed to be under the influence of a substance, and police were called. The police made contact with him. He was displaying extremely erratic behavior, and they patted him down. He had some brass knuckles in his pocket. They charged him with concealing a dangerous weapon via summons and sent him on his way. Mm-hmm. So this man was just sent into the community, clearly under the influence of something, clearly behaving erratically and in need of medical help. But instead of providing that medical help to him, they charged him with a crime and just kept him moving. So I think to answer the question, I think the way we abolish police, and when we talk about abolishing police, we're not talking about a free-for-all. We're just talking about reimagining how we address law enforcement. And I think to answer the question directly, I think we have to start with defunding and then go from there.
Any thoughts, Jessica?
Sure. Brittni, I like your phrase about reimagining law enforcement. I really like that. In terms of,
Unfortunately.
I think we definitely need to do some reevaluating. I think there needs to be a balance. We absolutely need law enforcement in ways to ensure public safety, but I think that there's a line. And I think that some of the money that goes towards policing right now needs to be reallocated to community policing again, and PAL centers and community liaisons and partnerships, because I think that was such an important piece back in the day, you know, that police officers got out of the car and actually walked the beat and, you know, communicated with the neighbors and knew the people in the neighborhood, or they may have, you know, played ball with the kids, or kids, you know, had a place to go and play basketball after school, and it was officer friendly and different things like that. There isn't money in most places for that. And the other part of this is that there are some police departments who financially are doing very well. They have the resources. They can do the community policing. But then there are other police departments in certain areas where they absolutely need that money, but they don't have it because of the tax base, and they don't have the resources to do some of these things that really need to be done. But then at the same breath, their overtime budget is outrageous. Well, maybe if you put money into the community in other ways, maybe it would balance. So I think we definitely need to reevaluate some things as far as policing, but I think we do need the public safety component.
Thank you. Okay, so I just want to stay on that real quick. So from a legal perspective, is defund the police a call that would backfire in the Black community, or how do we think it would better serve? And we kind of already touched on this, Brittni, and I think it really goes, it's more of a chicken and egg type situation, right? Whereas if you have better education systems, if you have better jobs, if you have better systems in place already, then you know you don't need policing on every corner in Black, because people are going to work and with jobs that they want to do, not just, you know, a minimum wage job, but something that they're interested in doing, things like that. But is there any space where you could think defunding the police could backfire actually on the community?
Me personally, no. You know, anybody on here that follows me on social media knows that I am a proponent of abolition. So reimagining the police, that's where I stand. I just think that we've seen too many deaths at the hands of police, and what the policing structure that we are operating under has proven time and time again that it is not working. And I know that for some people it's a scary thought, because, you know, police, how they are right now is all we've ever known, but it does not have to be like this. It does not have to be like this. So I think that people really need to dig deep, and I think people need to open their mind to the fact that it's not just about poof, there goes the police. It's about a long-term change and drastic shift from what we have now.
Yeah, and I will say that there are, you know, defund the police really got politicized, and, you know, it became, you know, a right versus left type situation and things like that. But there are, I've had conversations where officers themselves, chiefs specifically, recognize that, look, they don't want to be responding to a call that's a domestic, you know, drug abuse issue, or, you know, mental health and stuff like that. So there are places where they support it. You won't hear them speak up, and I think that's a bigger conversation that we need to have at a different time. But, you know, it's something that is recognized if you're thinking with it from a critical mindset point of view. Jessica, any thoughts on that before I come back to you for another question?
No, I don't have anything to add.
Okay, so then what programs are in place, or should there be programs in place? And you kind of touched on the community-oriented policing situation that will build more trusting relationships between law enforcement and the communities that they serve.
Well, I think citizens need to take the opportunity to go on ride-alongs. I think they need to take the opportunity to get on the review boards. Whenever the police departments post something where they're soliciting community input, town halls, and different things like that, I think it's not enough just to sit there and say, I hate the police are bad. Okay, you feel that way, but what are you going to do about it? And sometimes that means, you know, stepping into that uncomfortable spot. And instead of just saying, oh, police are bad, you know, when you see the police officer standing outside, maybe having a conversation with them. I just think there's just such a gap right now, and it's not going to be resolved overnight, but it really goes back to, I think, officers training, getting out of the car, the individuals they are before they're hired, and then also the community being open to not all officers are bad, and then also doing their part to bridge the gap in those relationships. So don't get mad if you see a flyer that says town hall meeting with the police chief and then you don't show up.
Sure. Do you find that at those town halls, those suggestions are implemented, or, you know, are they just really a lip service type situation?
Well, I think there's a little bit of both. I think, and I'll speak for what's going on now in Tampa. When I had the opportunity to meet with the police chief, and it was pretty much right after the George Floyd incident, like, police under fire. He was absolutely stressed, trying to figure out, hey, listen, like, what can we do? What does the community want us to do? How can we show up? I felt he was genuinely interested, and I think we gave him good feedback. And so after that meeting, he called us back. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend that meeting, but he called us back. He implemented the chief's, I think I wrote it down, the Chiefs Community Advisory Team. He put a posting out for that, for citizens to apply. You have to be like a resident for 5 years or something. So he was making that step. Now, will people apply? I don't know, but that would be a perfect opportunity for someone in the community to step up and apply for something like that. So I think it works both ways.
So Brittni, how can, you know, Black Terps students and alumni really influence change within the criminal justice system at the local level, but it can be federal as well?
That is a great question, because a lot of times what happens in the criminal justice system seems out of reach. But one of the things that I have really been trying to push on my social media platforms is court watching. Court watching is something I wish everybody could do, because we talk about these overarching themes and we talk about these topics, but what you guys really need to see, and I'm speaking directly to every person in this Zoom, what you guys really need to see is what's going down on the day-to-day. And I would highly recommend you all going to court and watching court, specifically bail reviews, because that's where it starts, right? You know, I had a person that was arrested and had to stay in jail overnight on an allegation of second-degree assault for throwing Uno cards at somebody. I mean, that person could have lost their job because of that. A lot of the injustice happens at bail review. Bail reviews happen every morning or every afternoon. So that is a really good way for people to make change, because if you're seeing something that you don't like in the age of social media, you can make that known. And these actors that are elected, it's very important for them to keep their, you know, image clean. But if we're putting out there what's really going down in the courthouse on the day-to-day, they're gonna have to change their tune, because people are going to be unhappy. And I know it's hard for people. It's hard for people to get to court. Court is Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 5. Work is Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So I understand that it's hard for people to get to court, but if you have the opportunity, I would really, 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 really push you to do that. Another option, if you are unable to get to Court Watch, just type Court Watch into Twitter and watch all the pages that come up of Court Watch programs where people sit for things like bail reviews and hearings, and they write notes, and then after they get out of court, if phones aren't allowed in court, they give a digest of what went down in court that day. And now that a lot of things are happening virtually, they're actually able to watch bail reviews over the Zoom call and do live tweets about what's happening, which I think is great. Two Court Watch programs that are really, really good for Maryland is at Court Watch PG and at Be More Court Watch. I would really, really recommend looking at those Twitter accounts because they give a live feed of what the cases are, what the state's attorney is arguing, what the public defender or defense attorney is arguing, and what the judge decides to do. So that is a way that even if you can't make it to court, you can know what's really going on in the criminal justice system.
Thank you for that. That was great. I mean, any thoughts, Jessica? Okay, no worries. So what are your recommendations, since we're on this topic, for addressing implicit bias within the criminal justice system at all levels? And this is open, either one of you.
So I think that implicit bias is such like a nice way of putting it, you know? I mean, I just feel like to not realize that racism plays a part in this system, I think is deliberate indifference to the facts, you know?
Sure.
Implicit bias is such a nice phrase, you know?
Yeah.
And I think, and I said this earlier, I think that until the leaders of this system acknowledge that and sort of take a step back from the whole go along to get along dynamic, and step away from focusing on self-preservation and just trying to make sure that they're good, then we may start to see some change. But until then, I don't think this implicit bias is going anywhere.
I have to agree with that. I think implicit bias training sounds really good. Right. But I've had the opportunity just to sit in implicit bias training, and it's the same thing over and over again. And then some people are sitting there like, why are we here? Nothing is wrong. I'm not racist. Or, you know, it's like, and those are the people you're trying to talk to, because sometimes it's not that outward, you know, emotion or conversation. Sometimes it's just how you treat people. Sometimes it's how you treat people in my profession, how you treat people in your caseload, how you speak to them, how you communicate with the family, you know, your posturing, a lot of that stuff. So it's not just, you know, that, you know, the outward action or display, you know, that you need to really reflect on and address. So I'm not really hopeful, honestly, with the implicit bias training and things. Right. It's going to take a lot more than that. And it's going to take the people who are already at the top to see the issue, and they don't. So that's the problem.
So I'm glad you said that, because I think we all agree that it exists, but, you know, how do you all account for white privilege within the criminal justice system? And how do you deal with it? And how are you trying to make change in your own space? We can only do so much, but you all are, you know, huge, you know, voices in your own space. So how are you dealing with it and making change?
Well, for me, my job, as I stated earlier, is to keep people out of the criminal justice system, because as it stands today, there are just so many harms. I mean, I could talk forever, and I know we don't have that much time. But between the courts, between jails and prisons, I mean, the harm that it does to people that look like us and our families, and just our overall ability to progress as a race. The criminal justice system has serious implications on that. So my job, I want to keep people away from that, but obviously that's not always possible. So me as a public defender, I try very, very, very hard to complete the narrative, to complete the story. Because when somebody is charged with a crime, they're defined by what happens in the four corners of a piece of paper.
Right.
And they're defined by another piece of paper that shows their criminal record. And that is not representative of a person or their life at all. I mean, we know that there are instances where people are held in jail and they plead guilty just so that they can get out.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that we then judge them for that later, and they can't get a job, they can't, you know, and they don't have any money, and then you want to know why they steal. You know what I mean? So I think my job as a public defender is to complete that person's story, to tell that story, to even though, you know, I've spoken a lot about the leaders in the criminal justice system being self-preserving and not acknowledging the damages that the system does to people. But if you have a strong narrative and if you have a strong story, you know, letters from people in the community, a strong showing of support in the courtroom for your client, that can help pull on some judges' heartstrings. And you just really have to humanize. These are people that we're talking about. So my job is to show the human side of these people. These are people. These are not just some, you know, you can't define somebody by what's on a piece of paper. So that's what I've done to try to combat the implicit bias of the criminal justice system.
Same question for you, Jessica.
So for me, I think I have a little more flexibility with where I am in terms of helping people. And with my job, most of the judges want us to, in our agency and just in general, they want us to help people until we cannot help them anymore. They want us to exhaust all of our options. And so keeping that in mind and just in the spirit of what I do, because I'm passionate about it, I really try to go the distance in building a rapport with the people that I work with. And that's asking about their family, asking about them, just, you know, not just being concerned about hitting the bullets of, you know, are you working? You know, what, you know, just the basic things. Like I really build a rapport and care about their transition. So I'll tell them, if you have a problem, let me know on the front end and I'll do my best to help you. You know, if you feel like you're about to go off the deep end, if you feel like you're about to use, contact me. And I had one of my guys contact me at 2 a.m. going off, and I picked up that phone and I listened to him and I calmed him down. And that next morning, he was not in jail. He was okay, and he thanked me. So I'm there and I'm present. And I also, on some level, attempt to relate. And I can't relate in all ways because I haven't been in prison, but we've all had a bad day. Most of us are one step away from making a bad decision that could land us in jail. Most of us have done things that probably could have landed us in jail. We just didn't get caught. Like, you know, I think about those things when I'm working. And so it's not just a job for me. And before I request a warrant for someone, I think about, okay, what have I done to assist this person? And is this the last resort? Is this something that I need to do? Because, you know, with the stroke of a pen, someone's freedom is gone. So all their progress is gone. The job is gone. They may relapse. You know, they may be the only person taking care of a family of 4 or 5. Mm-hmm. So I think about that, and it's not a power trip for me. So I think that's how I handle that.
Do you think other people within the criminal justice space have that same thought process, or is it just, you know, this is just a criminal?
I honestly, no, I don't think everyone is like that. I think throughout my career, because I've been in criminal justice since 2006. I've worked on the state level. I'm here on the federal level. I've been police. I've been in the, you know, in the courthouse. I've seen it all. And some people are there just to collect a check, and they don't build that rapport.
Sure.
And they're just, oh, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. Sorry, I'm gonna do this. You know, and unfortunately, I think that's true for almost all professions. There are some people who are just there to check the boxes, and this criminal justice field is no different. The unfortunate part about it is that it is someone else's life. So
That's right.
I think, but to be honest with you, there are definitely some people who really don't take it that seriously, and they really are unaffected.
And I think that permeates in all the spaces from the judges all the way down. And that's an unfortunate reality in life that I've at least found. And I see you all shaking your head, so I think you agree. Okay, we have a few more minutes, and I just want to get your personal perspective. We talked about it a lot, we brushed on it. Police reform, you know, so your perspective of police, is there legislation to answer, or is there something else? And I want you all to answer that, and then I'll tell you why I said that.
Well, again, guys, I'm an abolitionist. I'm sorry. I know people hate that, but I don't think reform is I don't think reform. I think we've tried reform. I think we need to dig deep. I'm not saying that it's a free for all. That's not what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. I'm saying we reimagine, we get rid of what we have now, we build something better that doesn't have a basis in oppression of people that look like us. We have to have some type of, I would imagine we would have to have some type of public safety unit, but it doesn't have to look like what it looks like now. So I don't necessarily think, I mean, we can go into legislation, but it's just like, until we put those sort of things into practice and just kind of wipe the slate clean and start over, I think we're just going to see repetitive issues.
And I think it depends on really where you are. I mean, you have some states and some communities that are more progressive when it comes to these issues, but you have others that are really hardline law and order spaces. And, you know, we've heard that term a lot, especially in the on the federal platform from the president. And we don't have time to go into that right now, but, you know, a lot's going on right now that we should all be aware of. Jessica, any quick reactions to that? Police reform, and should we have legislation or something else?
I think in some ways legislation may be helpful for some things, but legislation is not enough by itself. It's not enough for something to be on the books. It has to be enforced, and people have to be held accountable. And that seems to be the problem. People aren't being held accountable for their missteps, or when they make bad judgment calls, or when they're not doing their job effectively. In law enforcement, there is a certain amount of protection with some things, whether we want to say it or not. So I think this is a very complex issue. I mean, I think legislation has its place, but I think there needs to be some level of accountability. And until someone is held accountable, nothing's going to matter.
I'm glad you said that. Have you ever dealt with qualified immunity issues? Jessica.
Qualified immunity issues.
Because you said, you know, accountability is important. So I didn't know if you've ever dealt with that or not.
Honestly, off the top of my head, I don't think that I have personally, no.
Okay.
I have seen things throughout my career.
Did you share something real quick?
Oh, sure. So I will say this, it's no secret. You know, in my past career as an officer, there's a whole list of officers who cannot testify in court, but still have a job. How is that possible? How? So even back in my training days, when I was trained, the officer that I was trained by was a bad apple, but they still stuck me with them. So I've seen some things, and that's just two.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, and just for our attendees, qualified immunity is another big topic that's come out of police reform. And essentially what it is that as an officer of the law, you are not held to the same standards as a regular citizen, essentially. And if you do something that's deemed within the court system that it's been done within your constitutional rights, acting as an officer of the law, you're not going to be held accountable. And it's a civil thing right now, but there are spaces where, for example, this past June in Colorado, the governor signed a bill that actually changed qualified immunity in his state to be handled on the local level versus a federal issue. Most of your police unions and forces don't want qualified immunity going away for the exact reason Jessica just spoke about, But like we said earlier, elections do have consequences. So there were a few bills that did come out in the Congress's past session. Neither of them got passed, of course. The House had passed a great bill in response to George Floyd, but the Senate and Mitch McConnell did not take it up naturally. And then on the Senate side, there was a bill that did come out, but it didn't move anywhere. But certain terms I do encourage our attendees to look up. Of course, number one is qualified immunity and what that means, because if an officer comes and punches you in the face and you want to sue, but it's deemed that, you know, it was done within the constitutional powers, they'll get off and they'll just be considered as a great act, you know, a regular act of what they're doing. So be aware of that. Also be aware of de-escalation training, what that means. That's a term that's been thrown around a lot, but does it really mean anything? You know, I encourage our attendees to look into that. And behavioral intervention training. Those are a big three things that are going on. Behavioral intervention, of course, is if you see your officer, and Jessica, you could probably speak to this, doing something wrong, what happens if you step in and intervene? And is that seen as you're not protecting the blue line? And that's something that is being dealt with. So I know we don't really have time to dive into that, but you know, that goes back to the culture of policing where you stand with blue versus getting in, even though something wrong is going on. You know, you don't want to deal with it. So there are a ton of terms, and I wish we could dive into them. We may have a few more minutes of any closing remarks. Jessica, could we start with you?
Well, it has definitely been a pleasure serving tonight. I absolutely appreciate the opportunity. If I could say anything, please, please, please pay attention to your local level elections. Pay attention to what's going on in your community. And if you have the opportunity to be active and to go to town halls and, you know, community events and things, pay attention and invest in the community in which you live.
Thank you. Thank you. And Brittni.
Same here. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's a very necessary conversation that we need to have, and it's a conversation that we need to keep having. Thank you for inviting me. I see a lot of familiar faces. Well, not faces, but pretty much names on here. My Lion sisters are on here. My family was on here, my coworkers, my friends. So thank you everybody for coming and engaging. Oh, and one of my profiles is on here. So thank you everybody for coming and engaging. If I could leave you with two things, it would be court watch, court watch, court watch, court watch. And also be open-minded to ideas that may seem radical, because the time is now. This is the time that we need to be radical. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to send it to Cassie just to close us out.
Thank you so very much, Altmann. Thank you so very much to our panelists. I feel like I was on mute when I introduced myself before, but my name is Cassie Duah, and I am the president of the University of Maryland Black Alumni Association. And on behalf of UMBA, I want to say thank you to our panelists, our moderator, our attendees, to Thomas Dawson, our social action chair, putting this together. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I do hope that you all continue to attend the rest of our homecoming events. We have an event tomorrow, which is Cooking with Black Terps. You can find more information out about it on our Instagram page at Black Terp Alumni, or on our Facebook page, University of Maryland Black Alumni. Yes, happy homecoming, everybody. I wish we could be together, hopefully soon. And thanks again to our moderator and our panelists. You guys did a great job. We had great attendance, and the discussion was amazing. I'm sure we could have gone for another at least half hour.
I'm sure we could have. But thank you, everyone.
And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening. Yes, what Thomas said, join UMBA. We would love to have you. Bye.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Madam President, I think you might have the power to end it for everyone and start recording.
I'm doing that. Yep, thank you.
I'm going to hop off because it's really loud in my background. Yeah.